Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist Podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. I'm going to have my guest introduce herself to you all. Francis, can you hear
Oh,
me?
no. Yeah. Sorry. I thought you had another spiel going on afterwards. My bad.
Now we just starting out from the bat with
And you were
you.
just
Let's
telling me
go.
I was a pro at this, and I'm over there like, doop, doop.
I was like, did you scream freeze?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Frantzces Lys. I am a clinical therapist operating as a life coach. I run a wellness business called Define Resistance and Sacred Immersion Retreats. And my goal is really to just help people who feel stuck and unfulfilled to conquer their fears so that they can confidently thrive with clarity without all the judgment. And I do that through coaching and plant medicine retreats.
Thank you for that. And I'm really excited to have Francis on. I before we started to come on live, I was telling her how I was looking for somebody that does what she does, and I was on a podcast that she hosts, and then I started following her. I was like, oh my gosh, this is happening, and she said yes, and she's on. So we're in for a treat because I'm going to learn with my audience. But one of the things we do when we start, because where you are now is not where you came from, and I think
Oof.
there's this idea where people see people in a healing space and they're like, oh my god, like I wish I was like that, or blah blah blah. I tell everybody we got the power to do it. So I
Yeah.
love like hearing people's journey. So I would love to learn about a little bit about your upbringing. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, okay, it's been so many. I feel like I've lived multiple lives and I'm not that
Yeah.
old, but I'm originally from Haiti and I grew up actually in the Boston area, outside of Boston. And I grew up with typical Haitian family and immigrant traditions that said, hey, you go get a good job, go to school, do all those things. And then it came a point in my life where I realized all those things might have been a bit of a lie, right? So a bit of a
Well,
fib.
when
Yeah.
you were born in Haiti but raised
Yep.
in Boston, right?
Yep.
And because I mean I'm married to a Haitian.
Oh,
People,
okay.
yeah, people started seeing me because they thought I was Haitian, and I just know the culture so well. I cook the food. So
Oh, nice.
when the president died, people was DM me saying sorry about your president. I was like, what are they talking about? So I'm very familiar with the Haitian culture.
Yep.
The Haitian culture is a dope culture. And it's not just Haitians. I think like a lot of immigrant cultures. And this is something I'm always trying to dissect with clients who have became an adult and struggled, and just kind of I think the way they look at success as like, what you have. And I think they really come from a space of they want to see you succeed and not realizing that inner stuff. What did that do for you growing up, where you're kind of hearing this stuff and you're trying to you probably try to stay within the lines and do what you needed to do
Yeah.
to be successful? What was that like for you as growing up?
Yeah. In high school, I was a lackadaisical kind of like rebel introvert, did my own thing.
Oh,
Then I became like a teen mom. I got pregnant when I was 16. I had my son at 17. And that's when things took a turn. And I
yeah.
remember sitting in class, it was my senior year. No, actually, it was my junior year. And English was just my favorite class. I love writing. I love just poetry and words.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was I was in I believe AP English, and I remember the teacher saying, and she was a mean teacher, but for some reason she liked me. And I remember her looking down and being like really disappointed at the fact that I was pregnant. And there's a
Mm,
lot of kids in high school at the time that were getting pregnant, and she almost made it seem like my life was over in a sense. And I
mm,
almost remember that always. And after that, I realized, okay, I really have to make a life for myself. I didn't want to be another statistic. Thankfully, I
mhm,
had my grandmother around me and other family support that helped
mhm.
me during that process. I literally gave birth one week, I gave birth during April vacation, took 1 week off, went back to school, and then graduated,
Wow.
and then started college literally
Wow.
a few months later. So it was kind of like bang, bang, bang kind of thing,
Yeah.
and graduated a year. Took me 5 years to graduate. Went through some things that and I was actually on academic probation for a little bit, just because all the stressors, and had experienced a bit of depression, and um, removing myself from that relationship with his father. My son's 25 now, so he's a lot older now. But
When you say you experienced some depression during that time, because you're going back, you're looking in hindsight, but during that time, would you have framed it as I'm depressed?
no, I would not. I was
Okay.
very high functioning depression, and that took a
Yeah,
toll.
yeah, yeah.
It was high
Yeah.
functioning depression, high functioning anxiety for quite some time. And immigrant, like, you pull up, you just pull up your sleeves and you get to work. You don't have
That's
time to
it.
sort of process. I mean, I saw it from my aunt who raised me. I was raised by my aunts, and she had three other kids, and she was experiencing things as herself, and being a single parent, there was no time
Mhm.
to process and coddle and
Right.
do all those things, right?
Right.
And luckily I was able to, graduate, and then go to school, went to bachelor's in psychology, then went back into
What
the
made you
workforce.
pick psychology as
Is
a
it
major?
Yeah, it was interesting because, like, I really loved the brain. I love learning about human behavior. And I remember in high school, in my psychology class, we watched the movie Sybil, and I was so
Okay.
fascinated by it. And I was like, oh my God, this is the path. This is where I want to go. And
Wow.
I realized, and I thought I was going to be like a psychologist. That was really the goal.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I was like, I don't necessarily want to be in an office all day giving tests and just talking to people
Okay.
in the office. It just didn't fit my personality. And that's when I was introduced to social work. And I remember applying to Simmons, and I was like, I'm just going to apply, see what happens. Cause you didn't have to take the GED. And I was like, if I don't get in, then
Whatever.
I'll go through the
That's the way I
process.
started college too. I was Quincy College is a 2-year college. I don't know what I'm doing in my life, but I'm just gonna apply. I got in. Let me see what this thing's about.
Yeah. Well, Simmons was for grad school, and I got in. I was like, "Oh snap!" I was not ready to. It's like I would not expect to get in, but I did. And I was like, "Okay, I guess we going to grad school." And that was one of the hardest times because I was a single parent. I was in grad school.
Yeah.
I was working. I was doing internships. It was wild 2 years of my
Yeah.
life.
Free, right? You was working for free. The
Yeah, pretty
internship.
much.
Yeah. I don't know how we do it.
I don't know either. I don't know how I made it out alive, but I did, and got into the
Mhm.
workforce. I started in child welfare. A friend of mine was like, "Come here. This is great." And I was like, I don't know. And yeah, I don't know. I spent like about 6.5 years doing child welfare work, and I got burnt out. I literally burnt out. And in 2013, I left Massachusetts. My girl had passed away in 2011. And I was like, she was the one that raised me. And
Right.
so I left, went to the DC area, and I spent about 6 years in the DC area. But 2013, I burnt out. All that high functioning depression and anxiety finally took a toll on me. And I remember the day, it literally was just like kind of like a light bulb. And I tell this story often, but I remember it was like a gradual decline. I was calling late at least once a month. I mean, I was calling out at least once a month, going to work
Mhm.
late all of the time,
Mhm.
going late, leaving early. And I just started to just decline. And I remember one day I just decided, I did a no show. I didn't call out. I didn't do nothing.
Dang, you
I
didn't
just
care.
didn't
You
show
just
up. And something had happened to one of my kids on the caseload, which wasn't out of the ordinary for him. But, people were looking for me like, where's Fran at? And I was like, oh snap. And I remember talking to one of my coworkers who took care of everything. They just needed me to sign something, and it wasn't detrimental. But that was the moment I realized, oh, I gotta go. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
doing anybody service by being this jaded, this
Yeah.
checked out. I
Yeah.
literally, that day I came in, I wrote my resignation letter and gave like 3 weeks notice. And I remember my supervisor and her supervisor, they're all trying to keep me out. We'll put you in another place. We'll do this, we'll do that. And I was like, nah, I'm checked out. I didn't have a plan either. Okay. I gave 3 weeks. And I was,
That's
at the time, I was like, I was studying to take my real estate exam. And I was like, I'm just gonna go do real estate. I'm out of here. I wanted
dang.
my time back. I wanted more freedom. I didn't want to hear any more sad stories because you already
Mhm.
know. And I used
Yeah.
to work in the foster care division with residential. So these were kids that were never going home. So
Yeah.
it was really heavy work. And I decided that I was just going to do something. I wanted to be part of the rest of the world that was oblivious to trauma. Okay. I wanted to
And
know what that world felt like. Okay. And I was like, I'm done with this. So I left and I did real estate for 3 years. And that was really the hardest, like being an entrepreneur. Oh my
yeah,
God. That was a whole nother level that no one taught me, showed me
yeah,
nothing about, because now I had all this space and I had to be responsible for my time, for my
right,
mood. Because
yeah,
when you're working, you could get away with not feeling things because you could pack up your schedule with things. But when you're an entrepreneur and you're going on the highs and the lows,
yeah,
that's when you know whether you're made for something or not. Right. That's when you
yeah,
know, like everything just started bubbling to the surface. And that's when I realized, wow, like I really have high functioning depression and anxiety. I was in bed most of the time. I stopped like going out. I stopped connecting with friends. I was struggling with, I had mild panic attacks. And it was 2016, the beginning of 2016, where I was like, I needed something. I was going through a bad breakup, toxic relationship. Life was just like, it was like the dark night of the soul for me. Life was
yeah,
falling apart. And I was like, I need something. I don't know what it is, but I need to do something to sort of rattle myself out of this. And I remember just sort of doing my own self work. And I stumbled on this coach who was having this retreat. I didn't know her from Adam, but she resonated with me. And I literally got on the phone with her assistant and she was having a women's retreat. And I was like, I ain't got the money for this. It was like $1,500. Okay. I had no money for it because, you know, highs and lows of entrepreneurship, when you're working
yeah,
on commission, you have to hold on to that money. But I was like, I need this. And that retreat actually became the catalyst for everything else in my life. So I'm so glad that I said yes to it. I remember talking to her assistant one week, next week, buying a flight to fly all across the West Coast to California.
wow,
I didn't fly like that then. I didn't know where I was going into. It was just, and I don't necessarily care too much about like race and all this other stuff, but she was a white woman, but she spoke to me and she was very spiritual and very just like nurturing. So I went over there. Her name's Christine Hassler. I went over there on a weekend retreat in California, in Los Angeles, in the mountains. I don't even know. Some girl picked me up at the airport who
oh
actually
my
ended up
god, you
being
were desperate. Yeah,
with,
you went to fight. She was like, something gotta give. I'm listening like, whoa, yo, in the mountains. I'm sorry.
the girl,
It
no,
was
for
a
real. This
fight.
is what happens. And these are the clients that I work with because they've reached a wall, right? Like I got nowhere to go at this point. The girl
Listen,
that
they
picked me
got.
up, I got stories for days, Celeste, but the girl that picked me up at the airport, cracking
You
over
said we
here.
went to some mountain. You know, black people, and you ain't even African American. You Haitian. You was out of your comfort
I
zone for
was,
real.
that's just the beginning of it. I'm in this car with this lady. Her name's Lily, who ends up being my co-facilitator for the retreats now. Okay. So it's wild. So I tell you, everything has a purpose. Nothing and no experience is ever wasted. And
Yeah.
so she picks me up from the airport because she lives in LA. And I'm like, I'm totally apathetic at this point. I remember sitting in my car even before I made that decision. I was in DC, just sitting in my car. I was about to meet a client who was buying a house. And I remember just bawling my eyes out
Oh
because
my
I had so
god.
much apathy. I couldn't
And
feel
yeah,
anything. And I just
dang.
wanted to feel something. And I was just crying. I was contemplating suicide at times. I just didn't want to be here anymore. And so that's why I said I needed something. I was at the end of my rope, you know, and I
Mhm.
ended up going to this weekend retreat. And it was one of the most uncomfortable experiences in my life, one of the most immersive experiences in my life, but it's exactly what I needed. And I can't say that retreat changed my life, but it was the doorway for me to see, oh, these things that I've been doing was not working. They were no longer
Mhm.
serving me because I couldn't specify it because everything was just like a blur,
Yeah, yeah.
such a blur. And we did a lot of things. I did a lot of weird and uncomfortable things with 15 other women from all walks of life, all ages. I mean, staring into people's eyes. I did anger burns. I did like stuff that I'm a pretty low key person. I'm a simmerer, right? And I've learned over the time, like, I've healed some of that stuff, but I was someone that didn't express my anger like that. And it was weird for
Yeah.
me. I remember she gave us a bat. It was like, go ham. And I'm like, you want me to do what? You want me to what? And I'm looking around, I'm looking at all these people. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? But I was so resistant to expression, right?
Yeah.
And I, I ended up being a part of it. And I remember Christine saying one day, because at the end we did a like a little talent show. Everybody kind of like expressed themselves in different ways. And mine is I was in a spoken word community in Boston and in DC. And she just said, like, you're gonna do something with your voice. I could feel it. And it's so interesting that I'm doing like podcasts and all these other things. It's wild, right? Wild. And
Absolutely.
and I got back and I was like, holy shoot, I've got a lot of work to do. And at the time I was also seeing a therapist and everything else, but I just needed something to rattle, to
Yeah.
disrupt the patterns on a like monumental way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I got back and I started thinking about life and I'm like, this isn't it either. I was like, real estate isn't it either.
Yeah.
I'm so out of alignment at this time. And I can keep going. I don't know if you have any questions.
Well, I want to go. Thank you for sharing that, and just for people listening, because I'm pretty transparent about my life, and I think sometimes people think therapists have it together because of what
Oh
we
God,
do,
no.
and it's a job. And I say we go through the same things you go through, and it's interesting because just because you have the tools, because you went to school for this, doesn't mean that you were able to apply it to your life. When you go back and think about like the burnout and how you got to that point, you said, I'm quoting you, you said, I couldn't specify what was going on. And I think that's a big struggle that people have. That was a struggle I had. Like, it's like I'm working, I have a place to live. And when you work with people like in the community, like I was working at a shelter, you think that in your mind, but they have it worse. Why am I feeling this way? You're
Yep.
working with kids in foster care system, and you're like, and then so you start to compare yourself. Tell people a little bit about the part of, because now that you're in this other side, like not being able to specify like how that is so hard and why it's important not to get stuck in that part, like not being able to
Yeah.
name it
It's so important because like that finding the name for it can be very, very difficult. And I always tell
right.
folks, especially my clients, like honor where you are because everybody's on such a unique journey. And
Yeah.
comparing yourself to somebody else who you think or you assume that they're worse off, right? Because
Yeah.
it's just an assumption unless you have a conversation with that person. It's almost like, after traveling the world, people always think like these communities, they don't have much, but they're usually the most happiest people that I've ever
Happiest.
met,
Yep.
So it's just a misconception in our own minds to sort of keep us in victim mode. And
Mhm.
we really have to recognize when those thoughts are just sort of here to keep us in victim mode. And
Yeah.
it's not helping at all. So,
No.
yeah.
And then when you got to the point where you got out your comfort zone, I started this podcast because I used to go on live and answer questions about mental health and things like that. And I also wanted people to understand that therapy and psychiatry is not the only modality to healing.
No.
And unfortunately, that's what we're sold. So then if we can't get what we need from that modality, I think that we feel like we're doing life wrong.
Yeah.
Um, what uh, what were you going through, like, emotionally, as you are like on this path in California? Your Haitian background, you went to school for therapy, right? So like they
Mhm.
don't even teach us this stuff,
No.
um this holistic stuff in therapy. Like
Nope.
there's so much gatekeeping, and we'll go to that next. But I feel like there's this, like, you got to stay within the lines, and it's like, why when we're all different and we all have different needs? So what was that like for you to like step out your comfort zone?
It was hard because one of the things I realized about myself was a lack of vulnerability, a lack of expression. You know, my throat chakra was blocked. If you're into that sort of thing,
Yep, yep.
and uh, when you grow up in an immigrant household, depending, and not every immigrant household, but there was no like hugging and
Right, right, right.
affection and all the affirming words that a child needs to hear. So I had to do a lot
Yeah,
of inner child work
yep,
to work through some of that stuff and begin to reparent myself.
yeah.
But I just wasn't comfortable with being vulnerable, and
Hmm.
so now I make it a mission to put myself in spaces where I'm challenged to be
Oh,
vulnerable, because all this stuff is just practice, and it's the things that we just
yeah,
need to, it's a muscle, and we need to
yeah,
retrain ourselves to reconnect to that part of ourselves, because that is
mm,
our original self. And it's just
yeah,
all the clutter and all of the voices and all the situations that create that huge disconnect, that huge gap
yeah,
between who you really are and who you're not being. Right. And
yeah.
so vulnerability has been sort of the theme for me, among some other themes. So just working through that vulnerability.
That's good. And as you were talking about being able to release and all of the things and the chakras, right? Like I've learned about chakras and just different. January I was diagnosed with autoimmune disease in my liver, and prior to that I've been really into like holistic work and reading a book called Healing in a Toxic Culture, and how um and then I looked up the spiritual meaning for what happens when your liver, and it talks about holding in anger. And I
Anger.
think about like what you said,
Yeah.
especially as a Black woman in America, I feel like and not just that, but just kind of I grew up in church, and just like this kind of like passive, like just everything's fine, like just let it go. And that mentality created this thing in me where I just kept all my emotions in. Nothing came out, and I tell people like it needs somewhere to go. You're gonna struggle mentally, physically, medically, like, and it's like it's not talked about enough, you know.
Mm-mm.
What are your thoughts about that part where you think about all of the things that you've gone through, and as you're talking about like the immigrant family, even Black America, like, I think part of that is because we've always lived in survival mode. So we were never, like, our parents were never taught about emotions. They never had time to actually like feel, because they're in survival mode. But what are your thoughts about how people, because you work with people all the time, and I know there's a common theme of a lot of things just being kept in.
Oh my God, yes. I mean, I believe wholeheartedly the dis-ease in our body is a direct reflection of one, us holding things in, because you already know stuff gets stored in our organs and causes disruption, and also generational things that have not been healed, because we do take on, whether, everybody has their own belief
And
systems.
uterine, in our
Yes.
in your mother's womb, you take on, it
All the
literally
trauma,
starts there. Yep.
all the trauma, all the anxiety, all the depression, all of the emotions of your parents, your parents' parents, generational. So when I talk to people, I say to them, you're not just healing yourself, you're literally healing your lineage. You're disrupting
Good.
the this
I like that.
this this um this ongoing pattern, this negative ongoing pattern in your whole lineage, right? And it's
Mhm.
usually takes a black sheep. I talk a lot about black sheeps,
I'm the
but it
black
takes a
sheep.
black sheep to do that, because the black sheep has to step outside of the lines, get called all types of names,
You better than me?
all types of names. They're like, do you do all types of quote unquote crazy things? But that's what that's what it takes to do some of these things.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if we don't recognize that this stuff is being stored in our bodies, it's literally is destroying us, right? Especially if what we are living in a sort of toxic culture.
Yep.
It's like, how do you combat the physical and the
Yep.
energetic at the same
Yes.
time?
Yeah.
And there's a lot that people can do to sort of combat some of those things.
Yeah.
And so I usually work with a lot of folks to do that. I was going to say something else and I forgot, but um, yeah, yeah. I think
And
that's
I want, when you talk about like how people said you doing those quote unquote crazy things, and I just think about even me going to school or going to therapy, and I think about how we trust, and there's no shade against doctors, right? But we trust doctors who get a kickback for prescribing a pill, but what you do is looked at as crazy. And what are your thoughts about that? Because and I want to be clear that when you look at the norm culture, if you do anything outside of that, like it's like, oh my gosh, look at what you're doing. I tell people in family systems, when you start healing, people looking at you crazy because guess what? You're not living in that dysfunctional pattern. So yeah, to them it seems crazy. And I think about how I live my life now because I can just see the dysfunction in the culture. Some of the things I even when I just start talking about mental health, people's like not really subscribing to it like that, but now people are seeing the effects. But what are your thoughts about how we will praise like the medical system and look at plant medicine, something that's plant medicine, that's not like what's the word I'm looking for? Doctored up.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, it's just here's the thing. My belief is that everybody's on different levels of consciousness. And this is
That's true.
why we tend to sort of bump bump heads because or have misunderstanding or disagreements, and we often try to pull people in our level of consciousness, and then we do this tug of war thing. But if you look at back in history and you look at Rockefeller, who was the one who, because before pharmacology and before medicine, folks used plants to heal people. Then
Yeah.
Rockefeller came in, saw an opportunity, got rid of that system, and incentivized the medical practitioners to adopt this new system. And you could Google it. It's a real thing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's
Okay.
a real thing. It just
I just learned something new.
it's a real thing. So there's a some people might call me a conspiracy theorist, but there's an agenda behind all of this, right? Because it's all about profiting off of sickness. You can't profit off of a healed and united population, but you
You
sure
can't.
can profit off of
Yeah.
separation, division, and
Yeah.
sickness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the kind of work that it takes to heal yourself in a natural way, it takes work, right? If
Hmm.
you go see a naturopath doctor, they're going to tell you 6 months to a year for us to figure some things out. It's a lot easier to take a pill and have the assumption that this is actually going to fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll use I love my cousin daily, but she said it. She has high blood pressure, but for her to alter her lifestyle this time because she works a lot, the pill is just a lot easier. And it's not
Hmm.
knocking anybody, right? Because it does take a serious lifestyle overhaul for you to
Hmm.
do that. And it also takes mental and emotional stamina to be able to undo some of those belief systems and relearn a new set of skills.
Yeah.
And often people are very resistant to doing that, even though they know it's to their betterment. And that's why I say it's not about blame or anything because everyone's on a different level of consciousness. But as your consciousness expands, then you start to see things. The things that I used to see and know
Mhm.
back then are vastly different from the things that I used to believe in and the things that I
Yeah.
know and see today. But that
Yeah.
happens through growth because the name
Yeah.
of the game is expansion. It's not restriction,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's just people's fears.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear mongering that's happening in the world, and we can when we have a choice uh, to look at the fear or choose an alternative. And so
Hmm.
people are trapped in their fear cycles, and they find different. And you already know whatever you focus on, that's what you're going
That's
to bring in.
yeah.
So if I'm
Yeah.
fearing something, then I'm going to find all the evidence for the fear, and then next thing you know,
Yeah.
I'm on this loop and this cycle and everything else, and
Yeah.
I'm going to get all the confirmation that I need for this fear.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there are other alternatives, right? So I
I
think it's
I
just
love
yeah.
that. I love how you frame that, and that's like the way I do the podcast, right? When I speak, because it's not about like come to my side, but it's about helping people open their awareness of things. And you got to also think about the fact for my listeners, like part of your identity is the dominant like American culture, and even for me, like it took time for me to get there. And Francis is right, like it does take a lot of intentionality and to get through it. But if you're sold a quick fix, then like taking it makes sense, especially if you don't have um, the bandwidth. Some people start therapy. I've had people like, and then come back 6 months later because they really was like, I'm not ready for this, and I'm like, that's fine,
Yeah.
right? I don't knock it, but realizing that, um, I think for my listeners, like one thing I want you to take away from what Frantzces just said is just to keep an open mind, keep searching, because if you keep an open mind, keep asking yourself questions, I promise you're going to be able to get to that point of understanding, because I feel like the universe just, it all comes together. Growing up in church, I used to think that God, this spiritual thing was like this voice is supposed to speak to you, but then when I got older and really became spiritual, not religious, I understood that it's about being still, it's about paying attention, asking questions. I'm always asking myself questions, and I feel like the answers come. Like I do feel that way, and that's not the way I talk now. 15 years ago, I would have never thought I would be where I'm at, but I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Do you feel like that's what you did once you started this process?
Oh, for sure. I've always been a seeker. So I think people
Me
who
too.
end up stumbling on certain paths are usually the seekers. There are some folks
Mhm.
who, and again, this is no comparison, this is no judgment,
Right.
but I do believe like everybody has a specific set of purpose in when they come here. And so for me, learning has always been my drive. I always want to know, and I always ask questions. I mean, I used to get
Yeah.
into arguments with my supervisor because I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, what is
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I used to cause a little bit of a trouble, but
Yeah.
I always, and this is why I tell my clients, like, ask questions even for
Yeah.
yourself. Like,
Yep.
even the thoughts that are coming up in your head, like, where's the evidence? Like, why do I think this way? Why do I feel this way? What can I do about it? Because we
Yep.
often just get into the default mode. And I'm
Yep.
sure we'll talk about this later when we get to plant medicines, but that default mode network, it's like when you get a new computer, do you just keep it that way, or do you like put a nice wallpaper? Do you
Mhm.
increase the RAM? Do you try to optimize the computer?
Yep.
Well, that's how we are. We can optimize ourselves, or we could leave
We
ourselves at
can.
the default settings for the rest of our lives, or we can add some
Yeah.
things and begin to change or take away things, eliminate things, add and play around and tweak and make adjustments along our path. So we do
Oh,
have the option to do that.
I love that so much. So now you come back to DC from California with this like new mindset. And you can't really talk about it because like I remember when I was on my healing journey and I'm reading books and stuff, and I would get so excited, but I'm like, I ain't got nobody to tell. I gotta just like, so you're excited about it, you're in your bag. Um, do you go back into clinical work or do you stay out of it at that point?
Oh, that's a
Okay.
whole story. It's a whole
Okay.
story. Yeah. So I come back, and one of the things that s- my partner at the time gifted me was the secret, right? And that started everything. And one thing that I appreciate about real estate is that it really started my personal development journey as well. Because when you're in real estate, this is the first time that I saw like people actually cared about the way they think, the way they feel, just
Mhm.
working out and all of these things. And being in social work, you eat in your car, you drive in, you everything is in your car, you barely
Mhm.
walk, you're stressed out all the time. No one's talking about mindset or emotions or anything like
So
that. So being
talk
in
about
real estate,
paperwork, turning your
paperwork,
paperwork.
staying late, right? Working on the weekends. And this was the first time I was around people who really cared about how they felt and
Wow.
looked, and not in a shallow
Vain
way,
way.
but
Yeah.
really cared about their mindset, because your mindset really drives your business, right?
Yeah,
And that was the
yes.
first connection for me. And so I really am thankful for that experience, because I started to dig deep into personal development, like old sales stuff, and trying to, gain a lot of that knowledge. But 2016 was a really tough year because, when I came back, and, I was trying to, I was like, okay, I'm back here now. My son was 18, he turned 18, he was going off to college. And I thought to myself, okay, I can double down on this real estate thing. I was joined a new group. I was like, I can do that. But it just, my heart wasn't in it.
Mhm.
And then I got a phone call that my father passed away unexpectedly. And so between my father's death, and I was going to planning a funeral, and then my son was graduating high school. So, and I was
Dang.
going through empty nester. So, and I
Yeah.
was the one in, my friend groups who had a kid so young. Everybody had kids, but they were like 5, 6, 7. My
Right.
son's 18. So
Right.
there was no one else to talk to about this sort of next transition in my life. And
Yeah.
at that point, I sort of was isolating myself a little bit and just kind of trying to like hear myself for the first time. I just couldn't drown out the noise. And that's when I was like, I started looking at, I don't even know how I stumbled upon it, but I found teaching overseas. And at
Mm.
first I was like, okay, I mean, I guess I could travel. It's a good time. You know, my son's
Mhm.
older. I've never been like on a flight that far besides
And you already been to
California.
the mountains with
Right.
strangers. Nice. Well, if you did that, now you should be able to do anything, girl.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, all right. So actually before my father died, that's when I started researching. And then when my father died, I started to look at my own mortality. And I was like, my father
Mhm.
worked like 2 jobs and ended up having a heart attack. And I was like, that's not my life. I don't want to work myself to death. I don't want to kill myself for no job. I don't want that. I literally saw myself being that in the next 20, 30 years. And I was like, nah, no way. And I remember filling out the form and had an interview and everything. And I was like still dragging my feet. But my father died. That's when I was like, I'm just going to do this. I don't know what. And at first I was supposed to teach English in Mexico. And then my partner at the time was like, if you're going to do it, go to Thailand. And I was like, Thailand? That's like really far. I was like scared. I was like, I didn't know anybody else who was traveling. I didn't know, like, none of my friends were doing this kind of thing. But
Mhm.
I bought that one way ticket. I didn't tell anybody because, you know,
Oh
Haitians,
my
they talk to.
They're gonna start looking up
They
news
go-
stories in Thailand. Like, this happened to that person when they went out there, and then you're gonna be scared. You're gonna be like,
yeah. Because if you tell people, if you're about to do something so big and so courageous,
yeah,
and
you
you
gotta be
tell people who
careful.
are limited and small minded and fearful, they're going to talk you out of that. So
They're not hating on you.
no,
They
they
really
just,
don't see it.
they
They
don't
can't
see
see
it.
it.
And they're fearful. So
Yep.
I didn't tell anybody. I
Yeah,
remember being on the LAX
that
airport
was
calling my
smart.
aunt and was like, yeah, I'm leaving the country. And they're like, wait, what? Like
Dang.
literally all my friends on Facebook, I popped in Francis in Bangkok, landed in Bangkok. And everybody was like, wait, what? There was
You did
only a
it like
small
that,
group.
Francis? That was pretty bold of you. I would have waited a little bit.
There was there was a small group of people. I remember having a little going away dinner with some friends at the time. So a small group of people knew I was leaving, but
Oh, okay.
I really didn't tell many people. But I popped up in Thailand and I haven't looked back. I've been nomadic since 2016 and I
Wow.
haven't had an address per se since then. And that's been sort of, that has been the healing journey for me
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it allowed me to get quiet. Because sometimes in the beginning of a healing journey, isolation is required.
it's
And then you
required. Yeah,
find community and you can heal in community. But I needed
yeah,
that isolation to literally
yeah,
hear myself because I couldn't hear myself think.
yeah.
I didn't know whose thoughts those were. I couldn't feel. And while I was overseas, I was able to work with some shamans. I worked with some shamans in Thailand. I worked with some shamans in Bali. And I ended up teaching for about 3 years. And I knew that wasn't going to be the thing, but it's what I needed. I traveled all throughout Southeast Asia, had a wonderful, amazing time, met so many different people, started my
Wow.
traveling podcast, Chronicles Abroad, there, and that did really well. It's on hiatus now. And it was really lots of turning point moments for me at that time. And I came back in 2019
Wow.
and I was like, okay, I'm ready to do this mental health thing, but I'm going to do it my way. That's
Mhm.
it. I reactivated my license and I actually got a job at a school and started working, met some really amazing people. And then the pandemic happened. And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, what we gonna do? And the job that I had was I took over for somebody on maternity leave and I was working at a school and it was just amazing. I didn't realize how much I loved middle schoolers and I fell in
Mhm.
love with them. And so I built some really good relationships there. And at that time, I'm also a blog manager for this nonprofit called Black Girl Ventures, and I was writing for them, doing a lot of work for them pro bono for a little bit because of a friend of mine who had created it. And then it was a few months in, I had also met my partner. That's a whole nother story, and she travels also. And October 2020, we're like, if we're going to be quarantined, we might as well be quarantined in Mexico. So I decided to leave the country. And at that time, the high school actually offered me a position and was like, but I told them, I was like, I'm going to Mexico. Because at this point, I was like, if I'm going to take a job, it's going to be on my terms.
Yeah.
There was no like,
That
ooh,
burnout
can I
life
have
is like you're over
gone?
that. You're over that
I'm going to
burnout
ask
life.
for what I want. You take it,
Yeah.
you don't, I'm going to be okay. And
Yeah.
they accepted it. And so I did that for a year while I traveled through South America.
Wow.
And they asked me to come on. And I was like, is it going to be in person? And they were like, yes. I was like, no, thank you. So,
Yeah.
and I've been working for myself ever since then.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, everything about what you said is literally your brand, Defying Resistance. I'm just in awe at your courage, and I think when you hit rock bottom, it's kind of like, what am I gonna do? And you kept going. I mean, part of that, the independence and how you were raised probably helped with that a little bit. And just, when she talks about nomadic, and I just think about movement and how powerful movement is, how powerful releasing is and not being stagnant. There's something about that. But tell people about Defying Resistance and what this plant medicine journey looks like realistically for people when you're working with them.
Yeah. There's a couple of different uh, ways this happens. And yes, I like how you say that. That my life is defying resistance, right? Because that's really what it has
Literally,
been.
yeah.
So funny. Um, so I do the coaching, and
Yep.
well, in 2020, well, 2019 is when I had my first ayahuasca ceremony, and 2020 was also the first time where I met my mentor, Tahir Mayat.
Sorry, I just want to pause only because I feel like people are so green. I've only learned about this stuff through
Sure.
clients who talked about it, and then I've done my research. So let's just define what a shaman is and an ayahuasca, just for people that may not know what that means.
I will. So a shaman, honestly, anybody is a shaman. A shaman is just one who sees,
Mhm.
right? If you wake up from what would they call the sleepy state, and you'll know if you're in a sleepy state because if you're sort of just going with the motions and you're almost kind of robotic, but then something sparks within you and you kind of like begin to see the world in very different ways. You start asking questions. You start, going down that spiritual path.
Mhm.
Apologize about that. That's a shaman. But in
Mhm.
a literal sense, a shaman is somebody who is able to go through these altered states,
Mhm.
provide a space to allow people to do some deep healing.
Mhm.
And in indigenous tribes and indigenous eras, the shaman would actually go to these altered states and come back with the healing modalities to heal their communities.
Mm.
So even the way that ayahuasca was founded upon was from a shaman who got the message and went to the plants through this altered state and created the ayahuasca. And so
Okay.
ayahuasca is really just a brew, and it's made from two vines. It's a psychedelic brew, and it has the psychoactive compound called DMT. And DMT is naturally occurring in our brains. We already have
Mhm.
this. But when ingested, ayahuasca provides an altered state of
Mhm.
consciousness on various levels.
Mhm.
And it's a very powerful blue. And so this is what they call the grandmother of all medicines. So this
Mhm.
is like the teacher of all the plants, and it's a
Mhm.
very powerful medicine. And
Mhm.
so what happens is that it's a brew that you drink, usually depending on the shaman. It could be 3 to 4 cups throughout a almost 8 hour, 10 hour, 12 hour period. And but what it does is that it really allows profound healing to take place.
Mhm.
And but there's a lot of preparation that goes into it.
Mhm.
And because when I first did my ayahuasca ceremony, I knew I wanted to do it. I had saw a documentary, and I was like, "Oh my god, this seems interesting," but I didn't think about it ever again. Connected, I was in Mexico, connected with some folks, came back. Somebody recommended me to somebody else. Me, my sister, and a friend of mine, we went there and we had it. And it was like 20 other people. It was a little bit disjointed. There wasn't a lot of lack of preparation. This is why we do our retreats in a very intentional way, which I'll explain later. And I had the experience, but there was a lot of resistance, and I didn't drink as many cups or anything. I just felt kind of weird and didn't
Yeah.
have anybody to ask questions about or any of that nature. But ayahuasca is so powerful in the fact that it really helps a lot of increases the neural connectivity in the brain. So
Mm-hmm.
there are sometimes parts of our brain that are not talking to each other. And
Mm-hmm.
so what psychedelics does in general is create those conversations. They kind of wake up
Mm-hmm.
certain aspects of our brain. And it kind of takes us through an altered sense of self. And so each
Mm-hmm.
plant medicine does very different things in different ways. But overall, it's like you're meeting with yourself. And so
Yeah.
ayahuasca is more of a shadow medicine.
Yeah.
So, but it's also very loving. We always say to folks who want to join our retreat, think of it as your grandmother, loving grandmother that holds your hand, but also tells you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are not in the mental, emotional, and physical state, then this is why we do a lot of screening. Then the medicines, number one, may not be for you.
Yeah.
They also, you may not even get the fullest benefit from it
Yeah.
because a lot of these medicines allow for a lot of emotional release that take place. It
Yeah.
allows for neuroplasticity to happen. And neuroplasticity is just the brain's ability to reorganize and form new connections, new neural
Mm-hmm.
connections in the brain. And so if you're not prepared for that, it could be a very interesting trip.
Yeah. Okay. That was good.
Yeah.
I like the way you explained it. The shadow medicine, everybody that I've talked to that have gone on this journey, um, it sounds so powerful, and it takes you to a place that 6 months, a year in therapy can't take you. Like, it just,
Yeah.
there's some kind of like deepness to it, where I've heard famous people talk about this journey as well. Just how it just opened up, and I do you think part of why, you talked about the connections and talking to each other. Do you think part of the kind of disconnection takes place out of survival and just trauma? Like, do you think that's part of the disconnection, or what do you think that disconnection is about?
Yes and no. So, like I talked about the default mode network, we all have it. And the reason
Yeah.
why we have it is because if we had to think about how to brush our teeth, or if we had to think about
Right.
going to the store, like our taking the route to work, if we had to think
Okay.
about all those things that we do on automatic, that would be very stressful. So we need the
Yeah.
default mode network. It's part of
Uh,
our processes, right? But what happens, it's a double-edged sword because that default mode network also is part of the reason why there's like lots of mind wandering, and it also keeps us in a specific loop if we don't disrupt it. So what plant medicines do is they disrupt the patterns that have kept you looping. And so when
mm,
that disruption takes place, and we could talk about mushrooms, we could talk about all other ones too, but when that disruption takes place, it literally puts the guard down. And this is why one experience is like 10 years of therapy, because when we're without these plant medicines, and of course it's going to be different for everybody, but when we're without them, we sometimes have a guard up. We can't really hear things, we can't feel things, or we're very resistant to going there, right? Going to the depths of our
mm,
soul, for a very
mhm.
esoteric term. But the plant medicines bring that guard down, and you feel less fearful to confront your fears. You feel less fearful to confront the things that are really holding you back. And it allows you to have a conversation with yourself. And it also literally changes the cellular memory in your body. So all of those things, all
Oh,
the,
wow.
when the emotions are so trapped in your cells in your body,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's like a
Yeah.
total brain body reset,
Oh, shoot.
total reboot.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay, that I have chills listening to that. I just think about when people have talked about this journey, it just feels like, it's a not easier way, but it just feels like there's something just so powerful that sometimes talk therapy just
It just
doesn't
can't
get
do.
to.
Yeah.
It just
I
can't do, because a lot of it's stored in our, because that's why I struggle. So I love talk. I'm a therapist, so I'm glad I'm saying it. So it's like, oh, you're hating on therapists. I'm a whole therapist. I still do talk therapy, but I am also mindful of the limitations that talk therapy has, because a lot of stuff is stored in our body. You could talk all day, but like, you know what I'm saying? If it's in your body, like, I'm mindful of like really getting people like just um doing things outside of our talks, because I think but that's not a way that we've learned. You and I went to school for this stuff, and they don't talk about that stuff. They just say, oh, let's talk about the childhood and woe is you. But what about how it's stored in our body? So that's interesting. I didn't realize like how that just kind of creates this thing where it resets. Like that sounds so powerful.
It's very powerful. But I want to
Yeah.
say one thing about the plant medicines. It's it's just a tool,
It's
because
a tool.
often
Yeah.
people have this this idea that I'm going to take it and my life is going to be better.
Mhm.
It's a
No.
tool. The
Yeah.
biggest piece about this process is integration. And that's what I
Yeah.
didn't receive. And integration
Uh,
is what is needed for you to apply all the wisdom that you've gained from the plants. Because without
yeah.
integration, it's just not going to work. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you can go on, and we've seen this. We've seen people go on 50 ceremony, like hundreds of ceremonies, and they still haven't changed. And it's because they
Mm,
haven't integrated. Sometimes people use
mhm.
these ceremonies as a crutch, right? To
Okay.
avoid actually being in this plane, because you still have to be human. You still have to come back
Yeah.
here and
Yeah.
put one foot in your pants like
Yeah.
everybody else, right? And
Yeah.
so this is why our retreats are they're very curated in a very specific way to allow for the integration process to take place.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And even with, whether we're talking about talk therapy, yoga, meditation, EMDR, like I just think that everything, and that's one thing I tell people is that it's not anytime I've spoken to people about their journey, it wasn't like I did this one thing and everything was fine. And for some people, ayahuasca is the answer. For some people, it's not, right? Like just understanding what works for you, but not feeling like you have to be boxed into just psychiatry and just therapy. I think it's important. And for some people, psychiatry and therapy has done wonders, and I'm happy for them. But then I know there's a lot of people where that kind of thing doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so like I'm like grateful for you like talking about that. So you went to your first ayahuasca ceremony. There were parts of it that like spoke to you, but then you were able to see where it could have used a little tweaking in the
Yeah.
intentionality behind it, which
Yeah.
allowed you to like create your own stuff and work on tweaking it in the way that would work for others.
Exactly. So after that ayahuasca ceremony in 2020, I met with my mentor through Lily, the girl that picked me up at the airport
Mountains. Oh
in
yeah.
in the mountains. And that's when everything changed. I did my first 7-day plant medicine immersion with her. Not immersion, but retreat with
Nice.
her. And I was able to go deeper than I ever did. And at that time, ayahuasca wasn't even part of the retreat. I actually
Okay.
was like, do you know ayahuasca shaman? Because I really want to do this again in a very different way. And she had found somebody, and we sat, and he actually became her mentor. So we work with him now together. And so the reason why we decided to create our retreats in a particular way, because my friend Lily also had sort of a disjointed experience as well, is because a lot of people they will fly to Peru or all these Latin American countries and go sit with ayahuasca without any preparation.
Oh,
And
okay.
preparation is very, very key. And so when we do our retreats, we have a whole screening process that we take people through, because if you're on SSRIs, you cannot do this. If you're on high blood pressure medications, you cannot do this. You literally have to come to these plant medicines with a clean slate.
Mhm.
And so some people, we have to connect with a holistic psychiatrist or a
Mhm.
naturopath so that they can go through the tapering off process so they can get their bodies into balance. And then
Mhm.
some people, they might not even be grounded enough to go through this experience,
Right, right,
because
right.
you need some certain level of practices. So when people say like, oh, I'm afraid of a bad trip, there's no such thing as a bad trip, because it's really just your consciousness with your consciousness. So
Mhm.
depending on where you are in your consciousness, if you're ridden with fear and anxiety and you go into a plant medicine experience, you're going to experience that fear and anxiety to that extent.
Mm.
right? And
Yeah.
so usually we will make sure, like, because group dynamics matter in a journey like this.
Yeah.
And we never start with ayahuasca as the first. Ayahuasca
Right,
is
right,
the
right.
last. And so what we do is we start with well, first when somebody, we meet with them, we see the vibe. We want to make sure the group dynamics works. We want to make sure that they are coachable. They're able to
Yeah.
have hard conversations, because it is a vulnerable state that you're in, right? And we want to make sure that we create a very sacred container. And when they go through the process, and then we get people ready diet wise, because even before you get on this, do these medicines, there's certain foods that you got to cut out because it will interfere. There's medication you got to cut out because it'll interfere with the process. Some medications will block the plant medicine experience. And so
Mm.
we'll make sure that people also have grounding exercises, or we work with them beforehand. So we have pre-integration, we have integration during, and then we meet with them a month later to say, hey, you came
How-
back. You came back as, like, because you go through such an expansive state, you come back and you're like looking around like you don't have anybody to talk to about it. So we make sure that we connect with people post.
That's dope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the first part is that we do something called Campbell, which is a um, a medicine that comes from a frog, where they take the secretion of the frog and they open up the skin, and they put the dots, and they put the venom on the skin. But what the Campbell does, which I love, it's a purifier. It purifies the body, because what happens is people come in with a lot of dense energies, right? They and they need to be sort of cleansed, and their immune system needs to be boosted. And so what indigenous tribes used to do with Campbell is, when they would take like long treks, or the family was not feeling well, they would take Campbell to help them sustain their journeys, because
Mm.
Campbell actually has certain bioactive peptides that have therapeutic effects. So it really helps with like the nervous system, resetting the nervous system. It helps with the immune system. If you take, usually it's done in like a 3-day detox for some folks. We don't usually, with our retreat, you just do one, but some people opt to do more. And literally, like, it's like a cleansing for the body, like just a complete full cleanse. You just basically washing yourself both inside, energetically, spiritually.
Wow.
Of course, purging happens, but it literally goes in there and goes to the lymphatic system and finds any impurities within the body and just cleanses them out. So
Wow.
you can understand, if you go and you do ayahuasca and you're not cleansed,
Right, right, right.
there's going to be some imbalances there, possibly,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? And then from there, of course, Lily's also a trauma informed yoga teacher. So she will do yoga and breath work. So we're constantly moving the body. We're surrounded
Yeah.
by nature. And so we're integrating, not just talking, but you're integrating with nature. You're integrating by yourself. You're integrating with people. And then we have a holistic herbalist who's amazing. She's also a plant medicine woman. We sat with her on journeys as well. And she cooks to attune to the body. She cooks to attune to the medicines. So you're getting all these fresh foods in your body to support whatever's going on throughout the week. And then midweek, we do psychedelic mushrooms, beautiful magic mushrooms that,
Tell me about that.
yeah. So psychedelic mushrooms, we call it the heart medicine. So if you're looking to do inner child work, the mushrooms are beautiful for that. And what it does, it can really lead to profound changes in perception, mood, and cognition, which a lot of these plant medicines already do. And so what matters mostly about this is like strand and dosage, and also who's serving, right? Because
Mm.
sometimes whoever's serving also has a certain energetic frequency.
Mhm.
And so when people ingest the mushrooms, and a lot of things can happen. And this is what usually happens, is like it interacts with the serotonin receptors in the brain. And so that's why sometimes people feel very like elated and happy. Like my first trip, it was me and my sister in a room, and I laughed for like 6 hours straight because I just needed that
Yeah,
release. But it's going to be
yeah,
different for everybody, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so what it does, it actually takes you through a wide range of emotions. And for some people, they can purge through crying, they laugh, they just
yeah,
feel all the love from the mushroom. You start to feel it's going to sound a little hippie, but you really do feel like you're connected with everything and everyone. When you're on the mushrooms, it literally takes you through this oneness energy that you realize there is no separation between you and anything else in this universe. And so what happens is like it decreases that level of anxiety. This is why some people will take it on a microdosing level, right?
Yep.
Because the microdosing will actually help you over time increase your mood, right? So if you
Yeah.
have very low affect kind of situation going on, it helps to stabilize a lot of that. It helps
Mm.
decrease your anxiety. That's why people are using it for like PTSD and all these other things,
Yep.
because it actually works. And it does the same thing about the neuroplasticity. It also disrupts the DMN, the default mode network. And so we find that when people are done, it's like it's all heart. So it's all love. So if you've never experienced a certain kind of love, you will
Yeah.
feel that on a cellular level. And so even
Wow.
throughout the week, we're doing like inner child work, we're doing nervous system work. Lily teaches nervous system. I do inner child work. And then it was at the end of the week that we do ayahuasca, because you go through the cleansing, you go through the
Mhm.
love, you do the inner child work. So whatever comes
Yeah.
up in ayahuasca, you feel very prepared and empowered to actually meet this
Mhm.
master teacher, right?
Wow.
So there's a lot more to the retreat too, but on a overview, that's really what it is. So it's an immersion for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The two things that you said, that part, like the kind of theme, the nervous system and inner child. I do a lot of inner child stuff,
Hmm.
and I've done so much research, and then I think about the nervous system and how both of those, like in a retreat, like that kind of theme is really a dope way to work on kind of resetting. And again, whether it's a retreat or it's one modality, but then life still life. I say I wish life could take a pause while we're healing, but
Nah.
life is still lifing, and to be able to I think of it that way and not think of it as a one-stop shop is so important
Hmm.
for people that are even considering it. Now you are doing this. It's interesting because a lot when I talk to my clients, they've gone to, but it's not by accident. They have to go to another country because I feel like our
It's just,
country's so toxic.
yeah.
It's just so the
And
energy
it's not
is just
legal.
hard,
It's not legal, right? If you
and it's
do
not. Yeah, yeah,
ayahuasca,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
you do ayahuasca in the States, you have to do it through certified churches that do it. But it's still not legal. Uh,
California, no.
mm-mm.
Oh,
No,
okay. So
psilocybin, yeah, in certain states, but not ayahuasca.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
Yeah.
was doing just a side note, and we don't. I know you're so smart. You probably already. I mean, I not probably this. But I was just some of the psychedelic drugs was actually legal before.
Yep.
So I just find it interesting because I was getting some CEUs, and because I've been just so fascinated because so many of my clients have been talking about psychedelics, and then even some doctors are going towards that route, and I'm looking at the history of it. I'm like, this was
It
actually
was.
working,
They stopped
but
the
you can't
research on it.
patent.
Yeah.
You can't
You can't
patent
make money
plants,
off of
so
it.
they
We
can't.
gonna do
We gotta
patent
let
a
people know.
mushroom.
Let's illegal. Let's make this illegal because because we got too many people healing, and how we gonna make money? What
Yep.
was I gonna say? So you're going to DR. Tell people
Yep.
about your next retreat in DR.
Yeah, it's on October 22nd to the 29th. My mentor is also having one, I think November 12th. So we'll be helping her with her retreat. And we don't do these often. This is the third one. Usually we just see how we feel afterwards, because
Yeah,
we're
it's
doing our own
heavy.
work. We actually sit with you during
Yeah,
ayahuasca. So
it
we're
sounds
doing
heavy.
we're doing a lot of work. And so
Yeah,
after we debrief and see if we want to do another one based on how we feel. Um,
yeah.
so we don't have another one planned until just the one in October. And there's only one spot left.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Um, this was such a dope conversation. You're so smart. You're so enlightening, and I'm just like, people like you are why I started this podcast. Because I really just want to expose people to just different modalities. And you
Yeah.
summed it up perfectly when you said it's not like a one stop shop, and the integration is important. And so I always want to encourage people, if one thing doesn't work, don't give up on yourself. Like try something different, like don't ever allow yourself to be stuck, because you use the computer as an example, but I just think about how malleable we are. And you say that I'm gonna start using that the default mode. Don't worry, I'll coach you, Francis. But
It's fine.
The
It's on
default
Wikipedia.
mode. Yeah, like I love learning. I love what I do here on this podcast. But you're right, this default mode. I tell people if you like if there's a smell in your house and you've been in it for a week and somebody said, "What's that smell?" You're like, "What are you talking about?" You don't smell it because you've been sitting in it and you go outside and then you come back and you, oh, I smell it now. And I
Yeah.
think about the default mode and just how we are so used to a certain way we just stay in that way. Is it 80% is unconscious that we do? I forgot. It's a high percentage that is
Yeah.
just
I'm not sure what the number,
but
but
it's
yeah.
really high. It's
Yeah.
not like 50-50.
Yeah.
But a lot of it, there's times I'm driving and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm here already. And I'm like, ooh, then I
When
check
did
in
I
with
get there?
myself. Yeah, or if I'm on a train, right? Because I'm so used to going that way. You're right. Like that's what happens. So I'm
Hmm.
just grateful for your like knowledge on this subject and enlightening me and my audience about it. Even though there's only one spot left for the retreat, you're still available for coaching, right?
Yeah, and we do private. So if somebody wants to do a
Mhm.
private ceremony or and such, that's also available. And I just want to say that like what plant medicines do is it helps you to change your relationship. It gives you the space to
Yeah.
deal. I remember one young lady that came to our retreat, and one of the things that she recognized was that she had so much anger. And coming back home, she realized the things that used to make her angry no longer
That's so
supercharge her.
dope.
You know what I mean? That emotional reactivity had decreased. And so she was
Yeah,
able to look at her mom a different way and look at the people around her a very different way.
that's
And it
dope.
really altered her relationships. And that's what it does. It gives you the space. Sometimes you don't have enough space to deal with the things.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so dope. That's so powerful because she didn't hit the lottery. She didn't get a new house. 'Cause, in America, it's like these things are supposed to make you happy, but no, she was able to shift her way of thinking
Yeah.
with the space that she was giving. So that's super dope.
Yeah.
So tell people how they can reach you, if they wanted to reach out,
Yeah.
for
I hang
more.
out on Instagram. So I also have a
Oh
YouTube
yeah,
channel.
yeah, yeah. I follow her. So you're so authentic. I love authentic people. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off because
You're
I
fine. You're fine.
yeah, you come on my
Yeah.
timeline when I'm on. I always see you, and I'm always like hitting that heart
I
because
appreciate you, Celeste. Thank you.
I love people who are just helping people heal. So,
Yeah.
but sorry, go ahead, Francis. My bad.
You're fine. You're fine. I appreciate being on the show, Celeste. Thank you so much. But yeah, I hang out on Instagram and you can find some videos on YouTube. Just type in Define Resistance. And yeah, it's where where I hang out at. So you can DM me, ask any questions. I'm always open to chat with anybody. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you for your time.
Yeah.